This is Here in My Time, and I am so thankful and excited you've tuned in to this very first season of my brand new podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Hunt, and I am so honored to say that this first season of 16 episodes, hour-long weekly segments, is actually sponsored by one of my favorite stores in downtown Huntington, Indiana. Can you tell the excitement in my voice? That's right, you've guessed it, Turn the Page Books and Music Store. Rex is the owner of this fine establishment. This is the place to go if you are looking for your next read or to add to your vinyl collection. It is jam-packed full of used books, everything from fiction to nonfiction, and of course a huge variety of records from rock and roll to Taylor Swift. And let me tell you, Rex is the perfect owner because he is a music library. If you need help picking out your first record or maybe adding to your collection, this is the man for you. Whenever you walk in the door, music is playing constantly. You got perfect lighting. You've got the wooden floors. It's the perfect vibe to enjoy your day in. So make sure you stop in and visit, and also follow him on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much, Rex, for your support. It means the world to me. Now on to the episode. This is Here in My Time, the podcast dedicated to bridging the gap between generations. I'm your host, Lauren Hunt, a local personal journalist, photographer, documentarian, and a lover of people and their stories. Today, I am documenting the life of Carol Gebert, and I am so thankful she's a storytelling extraordinaire, which I seem to love that word extraordinaire because I like to introduce people that way. So, Carol, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I will represent the older generation today so that we can bridge the gap.
Oh, I love that. So, what I would love to start with is kind of take me back to your childhood a little bit. When and where were you born? And tell me about your family dynamic.
Sure. I was raised just south of South Whitley, Indiana, on a farm. And I was the youngest of 7, but most didn't live on the farm. By my 5th year, most were married and gone. So there was the boy, firstborn, and then 3 sisters who were all steps, like Irish sisters, where they were within a year of each other. And then a large gap, my sister, another sister, and then another gap, another sister, another gap, and I came along.
Oh, my goodness.
Lots of sisters.
Lots of sisters.
Yeah. And we had livestock, lots of chores, only 80 acres. Right around my 10th year, the Amish began to move in and they began to buy up all the farms. So there was tons of prejudice toward the Amish family, a lot of fear of Amish and who they were, what they represented. Was it a cult? Were they truly Christians? Would they paint their barns? Just crazy stuff. And I am so grateful that I had the experience of growing up near Amish because they are kind, wonderful, incredible people. And they took care of my parents once all of us moved out. So they were the ones who helped Mom clean or cook for special occasions. They just looked out for them. So when Dad broke his hip mowing all that yard, he couldn't be heard by Mom, who was in the house. The Amish live on a slower timeline, and they could see him and hear him and help. So I'm just so grateful that nearly that entire farm neighborhood now, all of like a 3-mile radius from our farm, almost all the farms are Amish.
There's a Amish family that on both my mom's side and my dad's side, grandparents live right close to one that just moved in. They just moved in and they built a house, and like they're coming a lot this way towards Wabash, which I love because I'm fascinated and they're amazing people.
Incredible people.
They are. So what year was this, about the time when they first kind of started moving in?
Oh, that would have been in the 70s. So right around early 70s, right around 72.
And why was there so much fear, do you think?
They dressed differently. They behaved differently. They spoke a different language. My dad was in the Army with World War II. So anyone who's speaking German or Pennsylvania Dutch would raise suspicion for someone who had fought the Germans. So just understanding there was an entire generation of people living on the farms who had been to war against the German population. So suddenly we have Pennsylvania Dutch being spoken, a German dialect, and everyone was concerned.
I guess I would never put those two and two things
The
together.
parallel is intensely interesting.
It is very interesting. I never would have thought of that because I guess for me, it never would have crossed my mind for them moving in or anything like that. Because first off, like I said, I was very fascinated with them and I love their culture and the things that they do and how they live. But I never would have put that in place there because I didn't live through any of that. But like I do.
Exactly.
That is fascinating. Wow. I never would have thought about that. That's so cool. But also kind of sad that it was, you know what I mean? But it's also part of that time and then what they had to go through and what they did. Wow. So tell me a little bit about your mom and dad. What were they like?
They lived into their 90s and mom was 42 when I was born. So she was very much an older mom and dad was nearly 50. So I grew up with parents older or about the same age as my friends' grandparents. So if you just think about that parallel, I didn't grow up with young parents. My brother grew up with young parents. Most of my sisters grew up with young parents. So it was as if mom and dad had different experiences with each of us. By the time I came along, they were financially stable. Dad was retired and home much more. Jimmy Carter had just put out an edict that we needed our fields to be fallow. So the government was paying Dad not to farm. So that's the dad I had, a dad who was at everything I ever did. He was at all my games, all my performances. He was always there. He was driving me to school if I missed the bus. That is not the dad my brother had. So when you ask me what my parents were like, even though they were the exact same two people, I had completely different parents than my other siblings. It's just amazing to me. My brother and I, we're 20 years apart. So when we talk about mom and dad, it's as if we had completely different parents. So they were kind and compassionate, hardworking. Oh my gosh, these people, they worked nonstop. So we lived on a farm. Dad was a pastor. He was a full-time teacher and also principal and administrator. He worked in the Manchester schools. Mom also taught in the Manchester schools. So we were always working. We had chores. They taught me to always have more than one job, have multiple sources of income, really taught me how to completely stress out every nervous system in my body. We were just a bundle of energy. Our family, we were always working. I ran the Vacation Bible School at church, very kid-centered. She was an elementary teacher. Dad was a middle and a high school level teacher. So when I was going to college, this will give you a hint as to the generation of my parents. Dad gave me two choices. You can be a nurse or a teacher. I didn't want to be a nurse. Doctor was not a choice. Did you notice that? Nurse or a teacher? Dad said, no, I'm giving you these two choices because you will always have job security. People will always be sick and dying, and people always need an education. And I said, okay, I want to teach theater. And Dad said, oh, that is not that. No, you can't make a living teaching theater. You can't do that. So be an elementary teacher like your mom or be a English teacher like me. And eventually I did all those things. I started out an elementary teacher just like my mom, became a middle school, high school English teacher just like my dad. And then I went off to Arizona to get a degree in theater. And then I started teaching theater full time and told them, hey, look at me. I'm teaching theater. You can make a living doing this. Look. And so that's how I started making real money in theater rather than just working for community theaters and that kind of thing.
Where did that introduction to theater start?
When I was 5, I had too much energy and got under my mom's feet. Everything happened when I was 5, I think. And Mom put me in a Saturday acting class with Mary Yarnell at the South Whitley Community Building. Oh my gosh, Mary Yarnell was just a dream. And she and her son, David Yarnell, who was just a year or two older than I, they taught improvisation. And from age 5, I was learning improv, and it changed my life. It's like I had permission to imagine and pretend, and it wasn't wrong or bad. Like I could be anything I wanted to be. I could do anything I wanted to do. And it just blew me away. And that's when it started.
What was that 5-year-old dreaming about?
Well, the 5-year-old was bossing all of her dolls around and teaching them. So I knew from a very early age, I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to teach in some capacity. But I know I dreamt about being an astronaut because we landed on the moon somewhere in that age range. There were all kinds of things. I wanted to be a genie, like I Dream of Jeannie, and live in a
Yes.
bottle. I wanted to live in a nest like New Zoo Review. So that's pretty much, oh, you didn't even get that reference. We're gapping the generations.
I
Just-
knew I Dream of
There's
Jeannie.
a gap. We're filling the gaps. And so, yeah, that's what I dreamt about.
Oh my goodness. So do you remember watching the moon landing?
On a black and white television, yes.
What was your first thought?
It was very cool, and I really didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
You know, there was a flag, and people were bouncing around, and everyone was excited. And yeah, I'm hoping that I really did see it, and the date of the moon landing was after 1962, because now my history brain is saying, yeah, that happened while I was alive. Yeah.
We'll go with it.
Yeah,
I think we'll just go with it.
Someone
I
correct me.
think it's fun. I love that. So you decided you wanted to teach. You took that kind of trajectory. One of my friends, she's 80 years old, and she told about the same story, sort of similar to you, about saying there's only like 3 things that she could be: a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher. And she chose to be a teacher. And I find it interesting now, just while we're on this subject and this ability to talk about bridging that gap, my generation has so much opportunity now. It's like anything's possible. My question to you is, do you think that's fully a good thing?
I think of all that, like your generation can do anything with technology. You can live anywhere in the world and work from a computer. I think it's amazing that people can invent and create and be entrepreneurs and have their own businesses. And I watch my stepdaughter, age 24, has her own little business. And I shouldn't say it like I'm minimizing it. I mean, she's working so hard to create her dream. It's just amazing. And so much of her work is being an influencer, which I don't understand at all. I don't understand that is a job, that pays bills, that you can be that. So maybe you can help me bridge the gap on normalizing being an influencer, because that just seems silly. It shouldn't be. That's what she does.
I don't think influencer for me has never been a comfortable word. I know there's the cheesy influencer that just sells stuff, that just does that kind of thing. I think for me, it depends on what they're truly doing with their platform. Are they making an impact in the way?
She works so hard.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. I think the opportunity that she's working so hard and doing all these things to get where she wants to go.
Right.
We're so blessed to be able to kind of choose our route.
Mm-hmm.
And, life is so different now because of the fact that it in some ways it's easier, in some ways it's harder. There's give and pull in every generation and every time and place. We were talking about the pioneers and stuff like that, but that's my easiest thing. Their only mindset was survival. Now we get to have the opportunity to and so was your mom and dad. It was survival. You worked and you worked and you worked. And that was the main thing on your mind, was to just be able to survive. And I think now we have so many opportunities where that doesn't have to be our first thought. And there's a lot of ditches we could fall in that conversation. But I think it's fascinating that those 2 generations are so different. You became a teacher.
I did.
And what was that kind of like for you? What did you learn being a teacher?
Oh my gosh, so many things. And if you're open to learning from your students, that is also amazing. But when you're young, oftentimes you're trying to establish your power and you're almost the same age as your students. And so you're so insecure and inexperienced that you're also self-defensive and power hungry and mean. And you're just trying to create who you are, or you're too nice and you're too lenient. And I was usually the fun teacher. So in my teacher evaluations, almost every one of them said, I think you're probably a little too fun, which means you're too lenient or you have no classroom management. But classroom management is what I did all the time. And oftentimes you can prevent problems by being fun, by laughing, by engaging, by understanding who your students are and digging into their interests. And so I think I learned how to do all of that. And I taught for nearly 40 years. I mean, it's just amazing for me to think that was a lot of years of my life and teaching so many different subjects. And I cannot tell you how many times I was hired to do something I wasn't legally able to do. So then I had to get the certification by the end of the school year. So not only was I hired to do something I'd never done before, I also didn't know very much about it. And then I was also going to school at the same time I was trying to teach. And then within 2 or 3 years, I was hired to do something else that I wasn't legally able to do. So then I had to get the certification. It was just such a ring for me. I've moved so many times. I taught in Ohio, Newcastle, Indiana, Goshen, Indiana. I went out to Arizona, taught all over the Phoenix area, Mesa, Glendale, Chandler, Kyrene, Ahwatukee, Phoenix. Oh my gosh. There's one more in South Phoenix was horrendous. South Phoenix, I had 3 Mexican drug lords in our school district, very small school district. And the seating charts from about 5th grade on, the kids chose them. You couldn't mix the gangs because if you did, their relatives had just fought that weekend. Somebody in the family, one of the families had gone to jail, had killed somebody, had been arrested. It was just insane. It was just insane.
And how old were you?
Oh gosh, I was probably in my 40s then. So I was older, and I was brought into that school because I had 2 master's degrees. It was a failing school district. I was kind of headhunted as a teacher in Arizona, moved around a lot because failing schools needed master's degrees to get points. And the more points they had, the easier they could pass their evaluation from the state. So they could either improve the education of the students or they could gain points by getting as many teachers with master's degrees as possible. So that particular year, 4 of us were brought in because we had multiple master's degrees. And then they paid us a decent sum because we were in a war zone. It was insane. It was the worst year of teaching.
Do you think you made a difference within that year?
With some of the younger kids, definitely. And then you said, what are some lessons that you've learned? I just really learned to love a population of student I hadn't spent a lot of time with. I hadn't spent a lot of time with Hispanic, or I should say urban Hispanic. Like I had taught Hispanic students for a long time. Goshen had a large Hispanic community. But I had never had to unconditionally love kids who were actively participating in gang behavior. And it just really changed my mind. Their younger brothers and sisters were so easy to teach. But then by the time they got to 6th, 7th, 8th grade, they were hardcore.
Already involved.
Some of them were making drug runs to Mexico, illegally driving vehicles. And we were Phoenix, Arizona, so we weren't too far from the border. And Manuel moved in mid-year, a beautiful young man, and 8th grader, a little older than 8th grade. And I said to him, "You are stellar. You're so bright. Have you thought about community college? Like just starting a community college?" And he said, "I already make more money than you." And I went, "Yeah, but you're going to be dead or in jail in 5 years." And he said, "Yep, I will." That same year, I taught a kid by the name of Devin, Devyn, Devin, and he kept stealing my art supplies. I was an art teacher, and he kept stealing my art supplies. And I knew that I wasn't going to stay past that year. So at the end of the year, I made up just a gift for him of art supplies. I knew I wasn't coming back. I just gave him a boatload of art supplies. And he said, "What is this?" And I said, "Well, so you don't slash my tires, number one. But number two, Devin, I just really enjoy you. You're an incredible artist, and I want you to explore art. Here you go." And he said, I don't want anything from you." And I said, you don't have to have a piece of me. This is just art. This is just all yours. You can stop taking it now. You can just have it. And I just have a feeling that made a difference, but I'll never know. I never saw him again.
I feel like, you don't know what kind of impact you're actually going to make on somebody,
No.
but to be in such a different culture, in such a different world than your own, I think in some ways that's great that you experienced. It was hard. You know what I mean? But I feel like sometimes you have a voice towards those kids. Like, you know what I mean? Even though it was hard and the things that they did, the parts of their lives you didn't understand, you wanted the best for them. And I think a lot of teachers are like that. They want the best for their students.
Right.
And so before we kind of move into storytelling, which is what I really would love to talk about, but I love to listen to stories of people's lives, so this is amazing. What was it that brought you to Arizona?
I wanted to get a master's in theater. I was I just turned 30. I had been through a divorce and I wanted to do something different. My dad said I would never be able to make a living doing theater. It wasn't that I wanted to prove him wrong. I just realized I could pay for my own degrees. So I had many choices for children's theater. Minnesota, too much snow. Hawaii, way too expensive. Texas, nah, that was not my first choice. Or Arizona. So Arizona it was. And they didn't accept me in the master's program. They accepted a lot of younger people who should not be with children, but that's just my opinion. And I got my degree in 3 semesters rather than 4 and had a job before I was graduated. It's just started working for the Mesa schools. Mesa schools hired me to be a creative arts specialist. So I worked with 52 elementaries, hiring talent, local, regional, national, international talent to perform in elementary schools. Did that for 3 years, and then somebody grabbed me and took me somewhere else.
So you always taught, but did you ever get a chance to really be on stage yourself?
Yeah.
What was your first show that you ever done?
Okay, my very first play was Rip Van Winkle, and I had one line, and I forgot it. So consequently, the rest of my life, I have remembered it. And it was, "There's a hole in the bucket." And I practiced it a lot with my dad. But once it was time to say it, I could not remember it for the life of me. And my dad was horrified. Some of my favorite roles, Ruth in Blythe Spirit. I did that in Parma, Ohio with a community theater, and then again at Elkhart Civic Theater. That is a lovely place to be. I like Elkhart Civic Theater an awful lot. Lots of other things.
Well, that's how we kind of met, was
Yes,
through
it
theater, which is so fun.
Yeah.
I really love theater, and I've grown to love theater. I've always loved plays and stuff, but one thing I love so much about theater is when you go, it's a different pace than a movie, or even it's a different pace than a radio show. You know what I mean? It's just, there's something different about it. And one thing I love about theater is when you're in there, you're all kind of sitting there watching the same thing, but you're getting something different out of it. Whether it's something funny, whether it's something very serious, whether it's a musical. I always love to sometimes I skip watching the play almost, and I'm watching other people
Yes.
within the
Or I
theater.
just close my eyes and listen.
Love stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I guess how did theater really impact your storytelling?
Oh, well, I hadn't planned to be a storyteller. Theater was something that I always did on the side. I don't even know how to begin with this, but it was usually why I was hired. So I was hired to teach English, but they really wanted a theater program. So they didn't pay me very much to do theater, but they wanted an after school program, or they wanted a theater elective, or they wanted dual credit. And I had a master's in theater, so I could teach dual credit. There were just all kinds of reasons I was hired to teach theater. But then I decided I wanted to do theater full time. I was at Arizona State University. One of my friends said, a group of us are going to take this storytelling class at a community theater, and Don Doyle is teaching it, and he happened to be a national teller out of the Mesa, Arizona area. He's phenomenal. He kind of looks like Papa Smurf, like Grandpa Smurf, like think that. And he can do an Irish dialect, so he's just amazing. But anyway, Don was teaching the class, so we could get master's level credit, which was nice because at a community theater, you typically can't do that. So I signed up for the class because my buddy was taking the class and I was working 3 jobs because I don't like debt. Then she dropped the class. So then I was stuck taking the class with a bunch of people I did not like very much at all. And I didn't want to sit with them or ride with them. I was just so mad at Barb. I couldn't believe she dropped the class. Then I met Beth and I met Susan, who were not taking it for master's credit. They were community members, and they changed my life. Don Doyle changed my life as a storyteller, and Bev and Susan just became incredible friends. In fact, I called Bev and her husband Mom and Dad. They got me involved with the church, got me involved with the church choir. That church choir toured Italy. It's just, I've sung in every dome in Italy, the Vatican. It's just so many things happened because I took that class. And because I took that class and I stuck with it, they asked me to teach storytelling at South Mountain Community College. And because I was teaching, they let me do some writing. Then they began to groom me as a regional teller. And all about the time everything was exploding for me in Arizona, I decided to move back to Indiana to be with my parents during the last few years of their lives. I walked away from my home, my career. I walked away from everything. I was telling professionally. I started telling professionally in 2000. I was traveling and telling stories in all kinds of places. And it was wonderful and incredible having mentors at South Mountain, having Don Doyle as a mentor. It was just amazing. And walked away from all of that, came back to Indiana, rented a double wide in Silver Lake, Indiana, brought my dogs with me, and I started telling around here. So I started telling at schools and libraries, retirement homes, churches, and then started teaching at Warsaw. Then Jay County picked me up at the high school. Tried to keep the storytelling going, but it's really difficult to teach full-time, run a theater program, also run a community theater program, and tell stories. There's just no time. So I started writing a column about storytelling for the Columbia City newspaper. And then the editor of the Columbia City newspaper left, and so my column kind of fell by the wayside too. Kind of left with her. I still tell on the side, but not as often as I would like.
I feel like I want to take us back to that first moment when you're sitting in that class and you're listening to him for the first time, or maybe that moment when it clicked, like, oh, this is actually really interesting. Of course I feel like storytelling in general really brings people together, which I hope so. You hope that's the goal with it. Can you take me back to that moment when you realized, I could do
this.
Or this is something that I want to do? What was that feeling? What was that realization in your mind?
I think it was the time that I stood up to tell a story, and you don't have notes and you don't memorize. So you don't read a story and then memorize it word for word like you would the lines in a play. So it brought together all that improvisation. But it was when I stood up to tell a story and then I couldn't remember part of it. And then I kept going and it all made sense. And I kind of made the story my own. And I got done and I went, oh my gosh, I kind of like my version better than the one that I learned. I think that I could do this. I think that this is really interesting and it is performance. I remember when a mentor said to me, you drew the sword out and it never disappeared. You always knew where the sword was. Well, yeah, you don't want to drop the baby, that kind of thing. You don't want things to disappear. But there were elements of theater and improv that I was able to teach my mentors, and they were able to teach me storytelling. And then it just became so unbelievable. So that first moment was, I forgot the story, but I'm going to keep going. I'm going to bluff my way through it. I'm going to act my way through it. And it's when theater, improv, storytelling all came together for me.
Was it a nervousness when that happened?
Yeah.
I feel like I would be very nervous. There's very many times when I've performed or whatever, and you're like, I'm off script. We're just gonna just keep going. Hopefully it
I'm the
works.
wild card now.
There we go.
But to have the feedback be, I love that version of the story. I've never heard that ending that way before. Well, that's because I just made it up because I couldn't remember the ending. And to have people say, you just look so confident, and it's, how you can disassociate when you're acting and you kind of watch yourself do your thing. And I hope that that's mentally stable because I have had times where I've disassociated and I'm kind of doing my grocery list, but I'm also acting at the same time. That you can multitask. You've done the part so many times. And it's just, that was the moment where I disassociated and I figured it out and I made it happen and it all came together. It was like, okay, this is fun. This is a challenge that I don't want to read and memorize. I don't want to do that. I want to read and create.
Okay, so let's talk about those crafting moments. This is definitely an art form that can either be just enjoyed at the table or on a big stage, right? I think we've all grown up around stories, and I don't know how your parents were. Were they very much storytellers in a sense? Yeah. Do you remember the first story they kind of told?
Oh, gosh. Mom would tell story. Where do I start this? By the time I was born, I only had one grandparent. So my mom loved to tell stories about growing up on the farm in Ohio and tell me stories about her parents. So I remember that. They also loved to tell stories about teaching, and Mom loved to tell the story about following Dad while he was in the Army and how she put her young son and a few belongings into a car and drove herself to Mississippi. And I thought, wow, is that my mom? So I love to hear those stories.
What year would you think that would have been?
That would have been wartime, so that would have been in the 40s.
Oh, wow. I can only imagine.
Right.
So when you're crafting these stories, I know I just took you down a bunny trail, but I find those little things fascinating because I can remember hearing stories all my life. And there are certain stories that really stay with me because half the time it's either told a lot or I'm like, that's a really good story. My grandparents were the same way. They tell the story. Both my grandmas still tell a lot of stories if you kind of poke and prod them. Sometimes when you don't poke and prod them, yes, ma'am. But sometimes when you think about storytelling and the fact that it's usually all, I guess I'm trying to find the right words for this because when I decide to write something, it definitely has a different voice than when I tell something.
Right.
But I've heard it said that when you're writing something, that if you do not take the time to craft it out properly, it's hard reading is sometimes very hard to follow. Or it's like they say that we've just finished all volumes of The Fall of Rome. Well, it didn't have to be 20 volumes, possibly. It could have been one volume. How do you craft your story to not only give it a timeline, but also give you all the senses of, like, you could look around the room if you're describing something happening? Or do you think about that sort of thing? Or I guess sometimes it comes natural. Some things are very natural.
Yeah, some of those things I don't even think about. Also, you said something earlier about how, and audience members in theater have different experiences. And that is also true in storytelling, that when I tell a story, you will have a parallel story. So you may not even be hearing my story because you are living in your own world according to your lens, your life experiences, like your triggers. I don't always include all of the senses because you want your listener to create that. So I depends on the story, actually. But if I'm telling the story about Finn McCool, the giant in Ireland, I don't want to set up all the colors. Boy, that takes a long time. I don't want to set up all the feels. I want the audience member to kind of jump in and create that themselves.
Storytellers that I listen to, and I'm trying to remember their names because I thought to look them up before I actually got on here, and I can't remember them right offhand. But he's passed away by now, but he was a storyteller out in Appalachia, in that big Appalachian festival, the storytelling event, is he used to perform there. And the way that he would tell things was so far different than other storytellers. How do you tell a story using your own colors as a person the way that he would have done? Because he was telling a lot of stories. For example, he would tell the stories of a lot of the folklore of the Appalachian Mountains. But because of his life, he was around it constantly, and he believed 90% of what it was. And also he would tell stories about his life. What do you think that difference is between telling a story that is clearly a fantasy and making it be believable, and just telling a story that shows your colors?
Interesting. So I think in the storytelling world, we spend a lot of time arguing about what stories are you allowed to tell. You shouldn't just pick up a book. And by the way, I did this for years. Pick up books and learn the stories quickly and then tell them and say, now you get to pay me money. And I'm telling stories from China and Africa and Native American tales. And I'm none of those things. And I haven't even been to any of those places. So from my perspective, if I'm going to tell it from my perspective, unfortunately, I'm probably going to whitewash and Christianize way too much because I have the lens of a woman, I have the lens of a Christian, I have the lens of Caucasian, very Caucasian woman. Even with all of the life experiences I've had all over this world, I am still very white. So I have to be very careful what stories I tell. So here's another thing. I have a family member who would prefer me not tell stories about the family. Well, gosh darn it, but that's my life experience, and that's what I'm going to go to. So, don't put my name in that story. And I get it. I understand it. But when I'm telling these colorful stories, which are based upon my life, which may or may not be completely true, and I throw a sibling's name in there, I get to play with that sibling throughout that whole story. I am thinking about that human, and I'm having a great time. But that person may not want to be in that story. Isn't that interesting? So I have to be careful and respectful. I am not always careful and I'm not always respectful because they're also my stories. So how do I do it? Well, I don't know. What's really complicated is trying to figure out what your stories are. So what are my stories? I was the storyteller for the Storyteller Cafe in, where was it? Chandler, Arizona, for a solid year. And they wanted me to come once a week, then twice a week, then 3 times a week telling stories. I was working full time in South Phoenix. I was exhausted, mentally, physically exhausted, and it takes 10 to 12 stories to fill an hour. So I was trying to learn 10 to 12 stories for once a week. That meant 30 stories 3 times a week. It was impossible. Most of those stories were not my stories. I shouldn't have been telling them. So it was such a huge learning curve to figure out what am I allowed to tell as a white Christian woman who grew up in the Midwest, Bible Belt. Now I can tell stories from Arizona. Now I can tell stories from China because I've been to China and I have been with children in China. I can tell some Native American stories, but I have to be careful because if they're sacred tales, they don't belong to me at all. But if they're published in a book by Pleasant Despain, I think I can tell those stories. If I'm calling them coyote stories, African stories, I always call them spider tales, never Anansi tales, because I'm not African American. I would not do Brer Rabbit tales. I am not African American. I've been to Ireland, so I think I can tell some Irish stories, specifically if I'm putting a frame around the story that includes my experience. Like I've been to the Giant's Causeway, so I can tell Finn McCool stories. Yes, I can because I've been there. So when I'm crafting a story, all of that is going through my mind. And then when I'm delivering the story, sometimes I will edit a story as I'm telling it because I see someone in the audience reacting to it positively or negatively. Or kids are squirmy, so it's too long, let's cut it. There are all kinds of things you just do in the heat of the moment. There is an epic tale I tell about Emma Edmondson, who's a Canadian girl who escaped a tyrant of a father, came to Flint, Michigan, dressed as a man to have independence and to make some money. And then she ends up fighting in the Civil War. And there are so many stories that I have learned about Emma. I was so afraid that historians would nitpick if I put Williamsburg ahead of another battle or I got some name out of whack. She did have typhoid fever, so I start the story with her having typhoid fever so I can just tell the stories as they come. And there are some stories that don't come out of me that I always tell. And other stories come to the surface that I never tell. And it's because I honestly believe it's because somebody needed to hear it. And I always do a Q&A at the end. And I explain, by the way, I never tell the Battle of Williamsburg. I don't even know where that came from because I never put it in my public telling. It's on the CD, but it's not in the public telling. So I don't know who in here needed to hear about Williamsburg. And a lady stood up and she said, I did. I'm from Williamsburg. It's like, my gosh, sometimes you just have a soul connection. So how do I craft it? I try to learn it. Well, let me start with the basic logistics. I use really big index cards to kind of skeleton graph it, where I just have the steps. I don't, unless there are quotes that I really want to put in there, I just have the basics of the story, just the basic plot line, and with the title and whatever else I need to know. And then when I'm reviewing them, I just flip through my cards. So if it doesn't fit on the front of that big card, it doesn't make the cut. So I'm really thinking Don Davis, who's from Appalachia. Donald Davis calls it the most important thing. What is the most important thing I'm trying to cover in the story? What does this story teach me? It doesn't matter what it teaches you. It has to teach me something. If it's not teaching me anything, then it's just entertainment. So that's where I start with my big index card. And I try to keep everything on the front and I just skeleton grid it, just bullet. And then those are my cards. And then when I put together a concert, I grab my cards and then I just flip through my cards, review them, and then hope they come out in some kind of an order. Or sometimes I'll just surprise myself and say, I was supposed to tell this story tonight, but this is the one that wants to be told. And then I'll tell that one. It's just crazy.
How do you keep it Interesting. It's a different, like we talked about the different speeds of like theater and television, whatever it might be. But storytelling is definitely a different speed. It's a different I guess sense in a way, because when you're sitting there and you're just listening to somebody talk on stage, for example, is the biggest one. Sometimes they have props, sometimes they don't have props.
Right.
Certain storytellers have some cultural things in the background, or they move and they swing to certain rhythms. You know, I feel like the rhythm of a story is very different for each storyteller as well.
Right. And their culture might dictate that.
Right. So how do we keep, as a storyteller or somebody that's wanting to start getting into storytelling, how do you keep somebody interested or hooked?
Yeah. You try to start out with something fun at the beginning, I think. For example, there's this story that I have taken from Elizabeth Ellis called Squeaky Door. And it's just a fun, interactive, adults will do it with me, kids will do it with me. It's just cute, progressive audience participation. It just gets us going. And then I keep it shorter or longer based upon their reaction and their involvement. And then typically I move into a longer piece, shorter piece, try to keep your personal connection there. That's super important to me, to always be personally connected to the story and to the audience, and never put two tenors together, like 2 10-minute stories together. So you try to break it up, a shorter one, a longer one. I try to vary the emotion. So if I have a high pace, then I go to a lower energy or a more somber pace. The Lion's Whisker is such a beautiful story. Out of different parts of Africa, out of Asia, it's called the Tiger Whisker. It's just a beautiful story about a woman who's sometimes she's lost her love or a relationship typically, and she's frustrated and she seeks help, like a magic something. It just depends which culture is telling it, like magic. And the wise man usually sends her to get a live lion's whisker, which is impossible until she does it. And then it's like, if I can do that, what else can I do? And it's like, it's just such an incredible human story about women and how we think we've lost everything and we think only magic or will save us. But no, it's just by our own guile. It's by our own force that we can get something done. And then it's like, what else can I do? That wasn't impossible. But I'll tell you a story about the Lion's Whisker. I was performing for Huntington. A community theater had a review, and they wanted me to do that in 2 back-to-back performances. So in the afternoon show and the evening show. Afternoon, not a problem. I wanted to tell that story. Evening, I did not want to tell that story. It's like, I have to tell the story. And it came out differently. So that's also part of it.
I love that, because I feel like every story, when you listen to it, you always are going to grab something out of it differently every time you hear it. You know, you talk about the lens in which we see the world and view the world. It is so different for each of us. I think about my lens and the stories that would easily be told through me. But when I start to craft different stories that pulls different cultures, that pulls different viewpoints, that whether I agree or don't agree, my question to you about storytelling is, you know how in history we've censored some history? How do you think you'll be able, how do you want to impact the world through your storytelling, knowing that you want to tell stories and do it justice to the people and to their culture? And how do you keep from censoring in a way that could be perceived in different matters, I guess, if that makes sense?
I don't think oral history will ever die, because we will always tell our stories to the next generation, even if it's in secret. Or even because it can't be written, we will continue to tell it. I don't know how I can personally impact the world of storytelling except to encourage other people to keep telling your stories. The Me Too movement encouraged a lot of people to step up and share their stories. And now it's happening again, this resurgence of telling stories of abuse or victimhood, and we're no longer the victim. So I'm really encouraged by those voices right now. I think my fear is too many people are not listening to the victim. We believe whoever writes the history. We believe the conqueror. We believe the strong. And as a history teacher, as an American history teacher, I tried very hard to keep the stories alive of the minority voice. What voices do we not hear enough? So I hope that by being a woman, I'm at least telling stories which are important to me, that have some kind of universal agreement or universal enjoyment, but also have a lesson. I haven't told many of my harder stories, and those are the stories of my personal abuse from childhood, my personal experience living a double life. What is it like to be a preacher's kid who is also being abused? So those are stories that I haven't told yet. And yet, through the Me Too movement and now this movement right now, I'm feeling that could be my next step to somehow get those stories out of my body. But you also have to feel very safe. And also, my audience is not my therapist. So you have to be very aware that your audience is also safe. So I don't believe I have reached my level of healing and acceptance yet to be able to craft a story that is safe for me to tell and for someone else to hear.
It's amazing the fact that that one day in your mind, it should be a possibility of telling your story, and you want to heal and you want to get to that point within yourself to where you can tell those stories. There's so many people going through different things in their life, and so many times we don't speak about those things because of one reason or the other, fear or misunderstanding. And I feel like a lot of the time is once that story is told, the respect for the person that I get from from that person in particular, or whoever it might be, the respect I feel and the understanding, because it's like when you put 4 people in a room and you tell them to now tell me what just happened within these 5 seconds, you've got 4 points of view, and it's like a disco ball. It's like completely every which way, and it shoots every which way because they've seen different details of their life. But once all those details come together, the strength that comes with that the story becoming so much stronger and more vivid and vibrant. Nora Ephron talked about when she was, I don't know if you've ever heard of Nora Ephron. Okay. She was an amazing journalist and essayist, and I find her funny. I don't always get everything because completely different time and place, but she's an amazing director and movie writer. But she talked about how you talked about victimhood and that idea that a lot of time being a victim, you almost, until you're able to say something about it and look within yourself and say it and admit it within yourself, you can't get over that victimhood. And that's the power of storytelling, even if it's just for yourself, telling your own story for yourself. You become the hero of your story because you saw a way to see it through. She talks about like falling on a banana peel, and if you tell somebody, you're able to be the hero of the story. It's funny instead of being made fun of. But I was thinking as we kind of wrap up, I have so much. I just could talk to you all day because there's so much that I wish I would have asked, but there's so much here that we've talked about already. Maya Angelou, which a lot of people that, if you've listened to the podcast before, you will know that I talk about Maya Angelou a lot because I respect and I admire her writing and who she was as a woman. And she talks about the fact that when she admitted the fact that one day she was going to die, living a life was far more easier. And the reason why I bring that up, because in storytelling, when we talked about the fact that when you start to see things more vividly and you start to look around and you see your life as it is, the power within your story is amazing. Is amazing, the fact that you're going to live your life and one day to be remembered for who you are. what I want to ask you is, for you, Carol, who do you want to be remembered as?
Oh my goodness. I just finished the book, My Little Life, and they ask at the end of that book, does your life make a difference? Does living on this earth make a difference? Like, how do you know you have changed someone? How do you know you've made an impact? And I think as a teacher, we ask that question a lot. Sometimes we just never know. And then there are some students, like I love watching them grow up on Facebook, and now they have kids and grandkids, and I can see the impact that they have. That's just beautiful. So I hope that I'm remembered as someone who walked through life enjoying other people and taking them in and collecting their stories and keeping their stories safe and just being a good person. Is that just too lame?
No.
That I just want to be a good person? Yeah.
Well, I think you are definitely well on your way, and I think you've impacted more people than what you think. I mean, just this conversation alone, to get to know you further and to hear just sections of your life. I mean, it's just little nooks of your life. I'm very honored to hear those things, and talking about some of the things in your life, just scraping the surface of just personal things. Thank you for sharing those.
You bet.
I think that's an amazing and incredibly brave thing to do. And I hope that, throughout your time and you think about how you want to tell your next stories, I hope that you find strength in whatever it is you want to tell. To end this podcast, I want to ask one last question, and that is, my whole hope is through this is to bridge that gap between generations. And we've joked a lot on this podcast about this fact. But if you could ask somebody my age any question about absolutely anything in the world, does not have to be about storytelling, does not have to be about anything that we've talked about today, but what is that question you would love to just ask?
Like, what fills your heart up? Because I think about that a lot now that I'm super close to retirement. Like, what's going to fill my days? And I want my days to be filled with everything that makes my heart full and happy. Having worked at Timbercrest Senior Living the last few years, these people, I only know them now in this chapter. I don't know them when they're vital and successful and making money and making kids. I know them in their last chapter. That affects you. So my job there is to make sure that day they laughed, they smiled, that day they felt seen and heard. It's just an incredible responsibility to make sure they feel connected and important in this world until the day they're no longer on it. And that fills my heart. So when I'm not doing that anymore and I'm not learning from them, I hope my days are filled with a lot of stories and dogs and flowers and watching the squirrels. And I think that's going to fill my heart. The memories of people, all these people I've loved and who have loved me. So I just hope, Lauren, you look at your life and you figure out what fills my heart.
I love that question. I thank you so much for being here. We had a little bit of a rough start because it took me forever to figure out how to get this recording to work properly. But thank you so much for sharing your story.
Interesting.
Oh my goodness. Like I said, I could talk to you for hours. I feel like I didn't even get to scrape the surface of what I wanted to talk about.
We'll have to have part 2, part 3, part 4.
We need to have a comeback series, and I would love that. But thank you again so much.
Betcha.
I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode because I sincerely did. I am incredibly inspired every single time someone walks into my studio and sits down. I am able to look in their eyes and I am welcomed into their story. And that is priceless. It is a great honor and also a great responsibility to think that when they said yes to come onto my podcast, that meant that they trusted me. They trusted me enough to allow me to help tell their story, and to me, that means the world. So thank you to my guest. If you'd like to connect with my guest, if they left any or mentioned any of social media or websites, it will be in the description box below, as well as on my Facebook and Instagram if you want to see what they look like. I have a portrait and a small little write-up along with anything they mentioned within this podcast. So I hope today that you have been inspired to look at your own life and to see that just living your life is important. But I want to inspire you as well to actually document your life. You have an importance in this world, and I want you to use your voice. So it doesn't have to look like 6 pages in a journal or being on a podcast. It can look like a line a day. If you'd like to connect with me, make sure you head over to hereinmytime.com. That is where I have a bi-weekly blog, as well as some of my portfolio work with photography, and where you can also contact me through email at hereinmytime@gmail.com, as well as follow me on Facebook and Instagram. This is at Here in My Time as well, here.inmytime for Instagram, and I have weekly content. Thank you so much for your support. It means the world. And until next week,